In my hand is a piece of Roman brick. It's not very smart. We've probably seen hundreds of bits of brick like this before, except when you turn it over, you can see that nearly 2,000 years ago, someone scrawled a list of names in it. They were probably some of the 1,000 or so soldiers who were stationed here at Venovia, one of the largest Roman forts in northern England. So we're stepping outside the fort's imposing ramparts to uncover the lost world of Venovia's vicus, the bars, the shops, and beyond them the cemeteries, which would have been such an essential part of life and death for Vincentus and co. We've never had the opportunity to dig an entire vicus before, probably because it's such a massive undertaking, and we've got just 3 days to do it. Venovia, or Binchester as it's known today, lies on Deer Street, the major Roman road that ran from York through Hadrian's Wall to the far north of the empire. This strategic route was lined with forts, the backbone of the Roman military presence in Britain. And the one at Venovia is a fantastic excavated example. It's a classic layout of barracks for up to 1,000 men, kitchens and stables, and a commandant's house, complete with a luxurious bathhouse. All surrounded by a massive stone wall. And beyond that wall was the vicus, the civilian settlement on which the fort depended. But so far, archaeologists have almost completely ignored it.
There have been loads of people digging inside the fort, but actually only one person has ever had a look outside in the vicus area. It's this chap, the Reverend Hoople, in 1891, and he produced this very interesting plan of buildings here, and we've got sketches of what he found. Now, these are really substantial bits of masonry, lots of different phases.
They do look like illustrations in a late 19th century children's book, don't they? And we have been ripped off by antiquarians before who've come up with all these fantasies which you actually can't substantiate. Is this stuff real?
Well, we've got something that can help us decide, because look at that aerial Photoshop. I mean, this is sensational. Here we've got Deer Street, and look, what looks exactly like these buildings very clearly here. I mean, you can even see that looks like the long building there. I mean, it just looks wonderful. It looks like this is a really accurate plan.
So if you just go around the outside, then we'll just crisscross it with lines cutting into curves about that.
So we're opening our first trench over the area dug by Hoople in the 19th century. And it should contain substantial stone buildings belonging to the vicus. But all this area, including the fort, is a scheduled ancient monument, and that means our digging options here are very limited. The entire area on that side of this fence is scheduled, so we can only put in one trench there. But given how big that fort was, we think the vicus might extend over here, which is unscheduled, where we can put in as many trenches as we like, if we get the evidence. Stu, any joy so far?
Well, this field looks rather interesting, Tony, because we've got some aerial photographs. There's the fort, that's the fence you've just walked along. Can you see that angle there? That looks like it might be an annex, a ditch feature or something, an annex onto the fort. Either that or it's even a remnant of an earlier fort or something of that sort of order. And there's another aerial photograph which shows a road coming out of the entrance to the fort, heading over that way. So, yeah, there's a possibility of lots in here.
And almost immediately, we've got our first find.
Roman. Our first piece of salmon.
While Phil works his way through the plough soil, our resident historian has been casting his somewhat sceptical eyes over our geophys.
Well, I don't think it's a temple, because a Romano-Celtic temple wouldn't normally turn up here, which is that kind of shape. I think it's much more likely to be a mausoleum.
Why do you say that?
Well, it reminds me of a mausoleum just outside Rome on the Appian Way, which consists of an enclosure wall and then with a central tomb in the middle.
So what's the difference between a temple and a mausoleum?
A mausoleum is a place that's dedicated to the memory of a deceased person. You might actually worship there religiously. You know, you'd go and perhaps offer sacrifices to the spirits of your departed. But I'd guess that that's more likely to turn out to be the mausoleum of maybe a commanding officer of this fort.
Well, finding the last resting place of a Roman commander doesn't happen every day. And I have to admit the geophysics results are some of the most striking we've ever seen on Time Team. So, with a strong sense of anticipation, we open our third trench over what looks like one of the walls of our possible mausoleum.
That's almost exactly the line of the wall where that sheep track is.
We'll hold you to that.
You know what I said? Almost exactly.
Ah, almost exactly.
Yeah.
I've never known a sheep walk in a straight line.
No. A bit like yourself, isn't it? After the beer.
After a few beers, yeah.
We put this rather long trench in here because earlier today John did some geophys here and he came up with two things which look suspiciously like ditches. Naomi, can I come in your trench?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
This is the edge of one of our ditches. This is the ditch fill. Okay, and if we come this way,
Yeah.
where this lighter patch is, this is our other edge, so it's quite a wide ditch.
That is a heck of a big ditch, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's that there?
Well, here is just something we're just uncovering. It looks like a nice piece of mortaria,
Which is...
which is kind of like a pestle and mortar for grinding food.
And this stuff here?
Again, just another nice, chunky vessel.
Both Roman?
It's definitely looking that way.
So does that mean that we can date this ditch as Roman?
I should say so, yeah.
I've built up the basic topography of the landscape as it is now. And on top of it, I've dropped what would have been the fort. And the first thing I've noticed is half the fort's hanging off the landscape.
I mean, there is a very good reason for that, because this side of the fort has actually slipped away. There's been a big landslip on this side here by the river, and it literally has gone. So it looks rather nice, but you're going to have to lose that side of it.
OK.
But what that illustrates really well is this high ground that the fort sits on, because it actually sits on effectively a raised island, doesn't it? The river on one side, the valley down here. That's a really dramatic piece of topography for dominating this major crossing of the river here.
Very distinctive.
So we extend Trench 2 into the area we hope's an early fort and continue to excavate our possible mausoleum trench. We've now uncovered this fantastic wall. And we need to work out how it relates to our potential cremation urn.
That's cleaning it really nicely now, isn't it? With that should be the inner face, according to the geophys, of whatever we've got here.
I'll take your word for that.
With not one but two discoveries of potentially national significance, our hunt for the vicus takes a back seat, with only Matt left scraping away in search of the substantial stone buildings recorded in the 19th century. Matt, we've got a mausoleum down there, we've got cremation burials, we've got a brand new Roman fort that no one's ever seen before. What have you got in your trench?
Well, apart from all this stone rubble, we've got hope, and we've got a day and a half as well, so we'll see how it goes.
The mausoleum alone would be a major discovery, but we also think we might have discovered a huge earlier fort. We know the fort that's visible today was built around 130 AD. So to prove this one's earlier, we need datable evidence.
So now you've got some decent edges to the ditch, you can get down into it now, I suppose.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see how deep this goes now.
I reckon it's going to actually come a fair old way down.
I hope so.
Have you got anything coming out of it?
Yeah, we've got some nice bits. There's this lovely Samian bowl.
That's nice, isn't it? You've got a date on that?
Late 1st, early 2nd century.
Back at the
And
heart
you're
of
not,
the site,
well, you're nowhere near the
scale
bottom of the ditch. So if we get in first century stuff this far up, makes you wonder what you got from lower down.
It's a promising start. These late 1st century finds take us back before the construction of the stone fort in around 130 AD. But there's no dating evidence in our first trench. In fact, despite Matt's earlier optimism, there's little sign of the stone buildings we'd expected to find.
So have you sorted this out now, Matt?
Yep, we've got it. That is the bottom of Hoopel's trench, finally.
Right.
You can see, though, that there's none of this lovely masonry left. And we know that's the bottom of his trench because, look, the most exciting find of Trench 1 so far.
Oh, well, that's not Roman, is it, at all?
You're getting good at this, aren't you?
Yeah, it's been a 19th century willow pattern.
And that was from it's from down there in the backfill, so that's confirmed that it's Victorian.
So, once he'd done those nice drawings of all that nice masonry, somebody must have pinched the stonework, in fact.
This is the first row of mausoleums to be found in Britain for 150 years, and only the second ever to be discovered. It's a find of national significance. Towards the end of the day, John started to get really excited about an area over here where he found this mysterious circular thing. So, Phil, have we found our mysterious circular feature?
We have, but it's not circular, it's square. This is it. You've got that straight edge there, and there's another straight edge there.
Yeah.
I think you could interpret that as a square mausoleum.
Is a mausoleum for a very small person or a pet?
No, not at all. I mean, it's perfectly feasible to have a cremation in there, and you can actually get a burial in there. I mean, when you look at the size of Ian against that, the inside thing, you could actually squeeze a human body in there and get it in there, no problem.
So there could still be a burial there?
There could well be a burial in there.
Bridge, it's a nice piece of masonry over there.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed it. It is indeed. It looks to be part of a column. You see this curved edge around here? That would have been the front of it.
Why is it flat on the other side?
Well, it's really been put up for aesthetic reasons rather than structural. So, of course, as it was standing there, this flat side would have been flush against the wall of the mausoleum, and then you would have just seen that curved column on the front. So there was no need to actually build a round column.
Yeah, but this is only half the story, isn't it? You've got something fairly small over there, but you've got this massive building here. You've got a wall there, a return there, a wall there, a return there. It's huge.
Ah, but you see, you're taking the obvious interpretation, which was exactly the interpretation that I came to when I first came here, and thinking that you did have this one big building. But you see, what we've got on the geophysics is this, which actually contradicts that there's going to be a wall across there, literally going across there, and we have no archaeological evidence for it.
So we're going to continue digging for the wall that Geophys says is here, while extending our trench to see if these two outer walls do join up. The truth is, it's mid-afternoon on day 3 and the layout of the mausolea is still a puzzle. Raysan and Guy are looking at possible models. Guy suspects each mausoleum was made up of a central chamber surrounded by a walled enclosure. But to confirm this, we need to find all 4 walls.
Oh! That's it, it's it there, isn't it? Yeah. There, look, there it is, it's pig grit.
This has been a truly remarkable dig. We came to this hill in search of a vicus, the civilian settlement that supported the Roman fort, and in the process we uncovered an entire lost landscape. We located the vicus along the road on either side of the fort, but we also discovered a huge earlier fort, which pushes the history of Vonovia back to the very beginning of Roman occupation in the north, and a row of 3 mausolea, the first group to be discovered in Britain for 150 years. We came here in search of the living, but found a city of the dead, a street lined with grand tombs, a little piece of the Roman world in the far north of the empire. And at its heart, perhaps the grandest mausoleum of all.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Welcome to the castle's a massive stone enclosure the size of a football pitch. And for once on Time Team, there's plenty of archaeology on the surface. So what's the big mystery? With 5,000 tons of stone right in front of us, this should be easy. Well, in fact, for hundreds of years, this site's baffled everyone who's seen it. It's been called everything from an Iron Age homestead to a Roman prison to a Dark Age stronghold. So what was it really? When was it built? And who was the king of the castles? We've only got 3 days. Is that enough time to find out? The remains of the castles lie near Hamsterley, 20 miles southwest of Durham in the Wear Valley. Sitting on the side of a hill in a sheep farm, the site's a huge dry stone enclosure measuring approximately 70 by 90 metres. Now overgrown with trees, its crumbling walls still form a monumental structure. But even so, no one knows what it is or when it was built. So the team stormed the castles, with our environmental archaeologist Emma beginning to core the enclosure ditch. This is the best place to find organic remains, which might give us crucial dating evidence. While Emma gets her first taste of the site, Stuart's scouring the perimeter of the enclosure to see how the stones stack up in the landscape. And Henry and Phil begin to survey the wall to find a location for a trench, because if we dig down to the foundations and uncover the ground it was built on, we might reveal some finds to give us a date. We're also putting in another trench across the north wall, hoping to learn more about its construction and locate the early ground surface and datable artefacts. By digging on this side, we've got less stone to shift, since the wall's least built up here. So John's hooked up with Frank the farmer to tap into his local knowledge and see if he can narrow down a target.
But there's evidence of ridge and furrow ploughing from the past in here.
Well, I would say the ridge and furrow would be done in the 1800s. They've left this area in the middle. I would say the reason they have left it was because they've obviously hit an obstruction. In Hodgkin's report, he claimed that they dumped stones in the central area here when they'd cleared it because it was so wet. But if you're clearing land, you wouldn't put your stones right in the middle.
You'd go to the side.
You go to the periphery, especially when you've got all this area to dump your stones on.
So this could be a good target for us to look at in the first instance?
I would say it definitely does need looking at, yes.
John begins to geophys the interior to find evidence of internal structures. Since working out a date's one thing, but understanding its function is even more of a challenge. In the entrance, we're trying to discover if there's a second guard chamber. But since the castle's is basically a massive dry stone wall, it's hard to tell fallen rubble from standing remains.
Does it have had any kind of bonding material at all?
Well, sometimes with these dry stone structures, they used to put clay bonding, almost like a putty in between the stones, but it washes out with the rain. I think you're still in rubble there, actually, Matt.
The longer we're here, the more of a mystery this place seems to be.
It's one of County Durham's least understood sites.
What are the stories about it?
In the 1st century, this area was occupied by the tribe of the Brigantes, and their relations with the Romans were quite turbulent at times, and the theory goes that the castles could have been a refuge when they were defeated in a major battle near their main base near Stanwick.
What else?
Another one is it was a Roman penal colony where slaves working in neighbouring lead mines were kept. Now, both of these suggestions are theoretically possible. We're not that far from Stanwick, and there are lead deposits in the area. But there's no real evidence for either.
So it's one of those things where people tell a story about a place and after a while everyone just believes it?
Yes, it's sort of fiction becoming fact or speculation becoming fact.
The Castles is steeped in legend, but this just increases our challenge to separate the fiction from the facts. Stuart, this place is called the Castles and you've got this massive stone wall here and you've got this big gully here which looks like it ought to be defensive, but if you look up there you would imagine if it was a castle it would be nestled right on top of it, but it isn't. It's almost as though it were in the lee of the hill.
You summed this site up really well because it's not defensive at all, is it? I mean, you could stand on that slope there and almost lob a flaming torch straight inside that enclosure.
Absolutely.
It's not a defensive feature, it's chosen for other reasons. It's a bit like Iron Age stone cladding. That's the best way to think about it. People are starting to show off in the landscape, demonstrating this is their area. We won't properly understand it until we start to look at its location in relation to the stream valleys, the hill slopes, all around.
It's called the Castles rather than the castle. Do you think originally it would have been lots of separate structures?
No, I think that's a red herring to some extent. It's just how farmers refer to things that they didn't quite understand. It looks like a collapsed castle to them, so they call it the Castles. It's of no significance whatsoever, that name.
In the interior, the archaeologists have opened 2 more trenches on the site of the antiquarian's old excavations. Their central position is the most likely place for occupation. Hodgkin had found stones here, and we want to check out whether they could be evidence of structures. As the new trenches get underway, our north wall trench has come to its end.
So I see Naomi's doing the recording here. Does that mean we've finished with this trench now?
Yep, we're closing this trench up.
So what did you decide in the end?
Well, actually it's really interesting. What we've actually got is them using the natural slope. So
Right.
here, what Naomi's sitting on is actually the natural.
Right.
And it
that's all
slopes
orangey
down.
yellowy stuff down
Yeah.
there. So is that set back into the mound then?
Yep, yeah it is.
And the $64,000 question, any finds from it?
No, you were right, none at all.
Yesterday we concentrated all our efforts on the exterior walls so that we could understand when and how they were built. On the north wall, Faye thinks that she might have located the original ground surface and is still searching for any datable finds. We're also beginning to learn how the site was constructed, as Naomi and the team clear tons of fallen rubble from the southern wall. While over at the entrance, we've moved mountains to expose the gateway. But how does it fit in with the original guardhouse? Why did we put this trench in?
Well, this is slap bang in the middle of that big geophysical anomaly that John picked up. And we actually positioned the trench so that we thought there was going to be a wall line going slap bang through the middle there.
I can't see a wall line.
No, it doesn't look like there's anything here.
What about the trench down there?
Yeah, well, come down and have a look at it.
Well, there doesn't seem to be much more in this one.
Well, you see, the idea of putting this one in is working on the assumption, as Francis said. Here we are in an Iron Age enclosure. Where is the most likely place for the building to be? Now, if you look back through there, we are slap bang in line with the main entrance. And in fact, we are slap bang in the middle of the enclosure, which is the most likely place for the high status building. Now, if we assume that anybody but Mr. and Mrs. Clean and Tidy was living here, you'd expect to find some traces that they lived here.
But we know there was ploughing here. Couldn't it be ploughed out?
This trench is placed on a ridge, so the archaeology is more likely to be preserved underneath it, and the furrows are on either side.
Afternoon of day 2, and with no internal structures or finds, the castles is still frustratingly mysterious. So we're throwing every means of investigation at the site. Emma's still coring, and we're opening another trench in the interior. But over at the southern wall, the archaeologists may have made some progress.
Really pleased about this, Mick. We've actually got the bottom of the wall. Look at that.
Oh, good.
It's actually sitting on that yellow natural there.
Yeah. So is it on an old ground surface down there?
No, it's not. And
Right.
that's really interesting because it means that they're going to have cut into the slope and created a kind of linear terrace to build it on. And the reason they've had to do that is because we've now been able to measure from face to face, which is another good thing, 5.1 metres wide.
Crikey.
So it's a hell of a thing, isn't it?
That's interesting, because when I was talking to Faye about the top rampart that's parallel with this, they did the same there.
Oh, really?
So it means they terraced that top in, they terraced this one in. I wonder what they did with the sides, because they run up the slopes.
So they're either going to have got a sort of ramp effect cut in, or they're going to have done it in a series of steps, aren't they?
So still no date, but at least the archaeology is consistent. Both the northern and southern walls were built on terraces into the natural hill slope. It's just so frustrating we've got no idea what the walls were enclosing.
So these are the stones, Mick, that we thought were part of the roundhouse.
A lot cleaner now, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's a lot cleaner, but as it's been cleaned up, we've seen that these stones are straight and form part of a rectangular building.
Right.
Right, so it can't be Iron Age, I don't think, but at that end, it's cut by those furrows.
So what date are they?
1780 was when this land was enclosed, so...
Right, so a pre-18th century building, but not Roman or medieval, presumably?
No. I think you're looking at something a little bit earlier than that, earlier than the medieval. You have that cell thing over there.
Yeah.
That might be Dark Age.
So it looks as though any Iron Age roundhouse that might have been here has been ploughed away. And instead, we found a square, potentially Dark Age structure, which would have been contemporary with the Dark Age guardhouse at the entrance. Tony, you've been fettling away all day trying to sort out whether this is just a tumble of stones or whether it could be something to do with the Iron Age people we think lived here. Have you come to any conclusion yet?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's structural now, Tony.
Why do you say that?
Well, the stones are nicely laid, they're nicely flat. They have exactly the same relationship to the underlying ground surface as does the main enclosure wall. They're just covered with this hill wash.
But these stones here, they're not really flat, are they?
No, that could be the wall which encloses these flat flagstones.
So what do you think they might be?
Well, we've got the geophysics just in this area. We've got a nice square edge on each side of it, just about under the polythene there, and a little way that way.
So it's not a roundhouse?
It's not a roundhouse, but it could be something like a stockyard, something like that, a sort of rectangular stockyard under the shelter of the wall.
It's great that at last we've got some kind of structure inside our enclosure, isn't it?
It's a real relief. It's absolutely great, isn't it?
Although this roundhouse has also turned out to be square, we still believe it's Iron Age since it was built at the same time as the enclosure and was probably used as a cattle pen lying in the shelter of the wall. So our 3-day siege has brought us closer to untangling the age-old mystery of the castles. The enclosed farmstead was built in the Iron Age. Its 5-metre thick stone walls would have stood 3 metres high, and the eastern entrance was fronted by 2 massive stones flanking an impressive wooden gate. There would probably have been a large stone roundhouse positioned opposite the gate. Stone cattle enclosures were built in the shelter of the walls, which would have protected the livestock.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
Before we can think about any trenches, even I'm getting involved with the heavy-duty pruning needed here at Derwentcote, 14 kilometres outside Newcastle, deep in the Derwent Valley. We know they made iron and steel here from the 18th century, but Derwentcote's barely on the radar when it comes to industrial Britain. Only this steel furnace has been dug and restored by English heritage. So it's the rest of the site we're here to investigate. Hidden under all this camouflage is a complex that was a tour de force in an emerging British steel industry.
Without being able to survey an open area, we can't really do anything.
But with the diggers filing in, we're not hanging around for geophys. We're opening our first huge trench here over these earthworks. We want to work out how many buildings there are, what went on inside them, and how they relate to these peculiar water channels, or leats, which seem to run through them. Luckily in Phil's trench, they're going great guns without the aid of geophys.
Ah! Look at that. Now, look, that edge is carrying on. It's that wall. Look,
it's just one going down here.
It is a big mound in the vegetation.
Yeah.
Go on, keep going. It's going right on out there.
Yeah, we're in the road now, but you can see it.
Well, that's the face of it. So that's a very, very good piece of advancement.
It is. Brilliant. And we're on the inside now.
Yep.
Inside the building. Yeah.
Bear in mind, it may not have happened if we hadn't have actually had the forethought to widen the trench.
I owe that entirely to you, Phil.
Thank you.
So after just a few hours, Phil's already inside the wall line of a quite sizable single building. But minutes later, it gets better.
Oh, bloody hell. That's interesting. That isn't demolition material. That's burning.
Which is great news. It looks like Phil's in the heart of a furnace. Trench 2's also underway around the Mill Pond Dam. You can't really see because it's under all this greenery, but the water table is right here. If I'd been here 100 and odd years ago, I'd have been up to my neck in the mill pond. It didn't take long to clear the nettles, Francis, but you really get the picture of a complex water system here now, don't you?
You do. I mean, it's been fabulously successful, I think, just getting rid of all that vegetation.
Yeah.
You really get a feel for it. Now, look, there's a photograph even. Now, this is an extraordinary thing. This was taken sometime between 1860 and 70, and it's looking in that direction. Now, we don't know what's going on inside this building, but look at this family here. They look pretty glum. He's got a lovely top hat, so he was probably quite a senior sort of chap.
But somewhere in here is that view. That's really tantalising, isn't it?
Wow, that's a fair drop of water in there, isn't it, Kerry?
It is.
But we have the technology.
We have. Shall I start it up?
Nothing yet, Kerry.
And there's another hitch.
Where's the water, Kerry? Taking a devil of a long...
And another.
Ah.
That's known as a blocked hose in the business, and it's not the only problem with this trench. Yesterday afternoon, everyone was getting really excited because in this trench there was something which they were calling a crucible furnace. And I was going, oh, wow, that's really exciting. Except I've really got no idea what a crucible furnace is. Mike, what is it?
All it is melting iron and steel bars in a pot, big tall pot. And I've got one down here. This is a crucible, which we found yesterday, and it would have been about 3 times the height of what we've got here. Steel bars inside, carbon over the top, lid on it.
Jerry, why do they bother to go through such an elaborate process?
Because what you're really after is a thing called clean steel, steel with no slag in it. So the great secret of this process is that you take these bars of steel from the cementation furnace, put them into these crucibles, raise them to 1200 degrees C, the steel melts, the slag inside also melts and floats to the surface. So you've now got an ingot of clean steel and some debris.
How do you get to a heat like 1200 degrees centigrade?
Well, you do need a furnace, and these crucible steel furnaces consist of a cellar where the furnace was, which was fed by coal. And on the floor above, this is where the crucible was filled and then lowered into this really hot furnace.
But this is only one process of a whole load that went on here over, what, 50, 100 years?
Oh, this is the last process to be introduced onto the site, so we think this is about 1850.
This is a fantastic discovery. Crucible steel was not only really top quality, but could be made in much higher quantities than any steel beforehand. With his pump now unclogged, Phil can crack on finding out how big this structure actually was.
What a wonderful floor, isn't it?
Oh, it's lovely, isn't it? And it's in such good condition as well. I mean, that's the thing.
I know. My first house had quarry tiles like this. I can just imagine what it'd be like living in this place. It's quite eerie, actually.
We've got the remains of the ash pan. You see, there's one handle for it there. And that's, well, it looks like a latch, but actually you would have had a handle in that just to pull the thing out when it was hot. That's really nice. But it's collapsed with the weight of the rubble on it.
So that's as they walked out of the house, they left the ash pan.
They left the ash pan. But it's so nice, you know, we concentrate down there on these big industrial buildings. And for me, it's so nice to do the house where they were living. It's the heart of the place. You know, they were eating here, they were sleeping here, they were making love here. Everything was here.
This cottage is a really evocative snapshot of 19th century domestic life. And it seems fantastic flooring was all the rage at Derwentcote. Phil, this trench has been a bit of a struggle, but you got there in the end.
We've actually now punched a hole in the culvert and used the water to wash the bricks down here, and it's been a very, very good servant to us.
It is a lovely floor, isn't it?
It's a gorgeous brick floor.
You've even got names on some of the bricks here, haven't you?
Yeah, I know. This is what I think is just so fantastic. It really does bring you into touch with people, what, 100, 200 years ago? I mean, here you've got very clearly Ramsay and then Ritson in there. But they are real people that existed.
So, are you finished now?
Oh, if only. I mean, the crucial thing is, we've always been happy this is the crucible furnace. You see, when we originally came here, we thought that it extended along here and you'd have a load of individual bays where you could have actually placed the crucibles in to make the steel. But we now think that we may actually have got the crucible furnace the wrong way round.
Yeah.
It goes this way.
So what's this thing here?
Well, you see, this could be part of the original partitions that would have separated up the different bays of the furnace. So what we've got to do now is shift all our spoil and extend the trench that way.
So you are going to shift 20 tons of spoil?
Oh, no, I'm not. But he is.
And after the day Ian's had, I'm sure shifting that will be a walk in the park. It's been a fantastic day's work as Phil's crucible furnace gets better and better. But tomorrow it'll be all hands to the deck as we continue to look for proof of an industrial process we never imagined we'd find when we first came here. If this dam is actually a recycled blast furnace, it'll be the earliest ironworks on the site and the start of Derwentcote's industrial revolution. Beginning of day 3 here at County Durham, where we've travelled back in time and transformed this rural idyll into a seething mass of industrial activity in the 18th and 19th century. At least we thought we were in the 18th and 19th century, but Stuart reckons he can push the date back even further. What's up your sleeve?
We have mention of a mill, corn mill here in the 16th century, late 16th century. On the first map we've got of the site, a building here which may indicate a mill site, because we've got basically an oak channel coming down here, a little channel down the side of the building. So it's speculative, but I would like to see what's going on in this building.
Stuart, I have to say not everybody is yet convinced that there is an earlier mill here, but how are we going to prove whether or not he's right?
Well, what I plan to do is start a trench down there, across the centre of the building, on the floor, over the wall, onto the road, end about here.
Hang on, how do you know there's a wall here and a road there? Have you just made that up?
Yes, with a bit of help from Stuart's map.
So if the map's right, then this is where the wall and the road would be?
You've got it.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? There's no time to lose as the digger moves in to open the trench. If it is a 16th century mill, it would suggest early and successful water management, making it an ideal location for the next 3 centuries of industrial activity. Phil's in the 19th century with his trench, working out the direction and scale of his crucible furnace.
I think that might be the corner, the entrance. So I think it's that wide, which should be about that wide as well.
And with each scoop, more clay crucible pot emerges. Jerry's still only midway through processing the crucible slag from Phil's trench to find out how good the steel was. After grinding, it has to go through 3 types of acid before it can go under the microscope for the verdict. So as Jerry labours away, Marilyn's been looking into Derwentcote's labour force, recorded in the 19th century census. What did people actually do who lived here?
Well, fortunately, the census returns tell us the occupations which enable us to link them to the site. So, Mike, we've got a retired steel converter there, we've got a roller, and we've got a steel melter.
What's a steel converter and a steel melter?
Steel converter, they're working up at the cementation furnace just up the valley, but the steel melter, they're working with the crucible furnaces we've just been excavating.
So we can now put a name to the guy who was working where Phil's trench is now?
We certainly can. His name is Joseph Brown, he's aged 49, and he's got a wife called Margaret, who is 39.
And over in the crucible trench, Phil's getting closer and closer to steel melter Brown.
Within less than a metre we've been digging here, and now we've got really intense heat. I mean, look at the way these bricks have been really, really red, and look at the colour of the mortar as well. I mean, I think that those bricks are actually part of a single structure. I mean, I think they are laid bricks. And look, you've got a very clear edge of all this material coming round here between the burnt material there and this black stuff on there. But the really crucial thing that does really bring it home is not just the colour of these bricks, but look, they're fused together.
I mean, that's fantastic. To me, that is the hot face of a crucible furnace.
The phenomenal amount of burnt brick means Phil is definitely in the first crucible furnace bay. They now need to clear even more of the trench to reveal its full size.
Tell you what, Ian, that is looking like a nice section. Perfection.
Perfection indeed. And over where we're looking for a water wheel, Raksha also seems to be getting results.
We have a complete jumbled mess of stones that have obviously been reused and put on top. But then we've got this really nice uniformed bit at the bottom there, really nicely dressed stone.
What fascinates me is that lower one with the beautiful stonework. I mean, that's your original wheel pit. That is the evidence we're looking for, that we do have a wheel here.
Yeah.
You know, that's crucially important.
So finally, we've got the location of our water wheel. But it's nothing to do with the crucible furnace. which means it's evidence of other intense industry at Derwentcote. Phil, where you are, yesterday afternoon you thought that those might be recesses to put crucibles in. Do you still think that?
Oh, it's absolutely undeniable now, Tony. We have got 2 of what we think are probably 6 recesses. We've got a brick wall there, a brick pier, and then a recess. And the flue goes right the way through and comes up through there. Then we've got another brick pier and another recess with a flue coming up right the way through. And then we've got another brick pier and another recess. So the design is confirmed. And where I'm standing really is the stokehole, it's the engine room. So where I've been taking the muck out, they would have been shoveling the fuel in to create the fire.
And what's my bloke Joseph Brown doing, the bloke who lives in the cottage down there?
He's the crucible man. He's standing pretty much where you're standing. And with his cloth cap, just like you, he'd have been loading his crucibles into the furnace to make the steels.
What about this up here? Is this the same period?
No, this is slightly later, Tony. This is small-scale forging going on here. And we've got a census return from 1901 that mentions a spade forging, spade making going on the site. So it looks like that's probably to do with that process.
So that's quite nice, isn't it? Here we've got industry at its height, and here we've got the end of the story on this side.
Absolutely.
And as Jerry has finally finished processing the crucible slag, we can at last find out how skilled Derwentcote's workforce was at making crucible steel. Cool, that's an incredibly vivid image, Jerry.
Well, looking at this image, if you see that this sort of the darker areas, and then you've got these very white areas running around these edges. And this tells me that this is what's called a hypoeutectoid steel. It means it's a steel with about 1% carbon. You couldn't get a better steel. So in my view, they are producing excellent quality, high quality crucible steel.
Hypoeutectic steels?
Hypoeutectoid.
Oh, nearly right. Crucible steel was used to make springs and pendulums, and the continuing development of ever better metal was the driving force behind the industrialisation of Britain. But if Derwentcote kept pace technologically, why did it decline? Well, you can always rely on a historian and a map for answers.
Up here we've got the toll road which went in 1842, you see it on the map here. I would have thought this would have given it a new lease of life to get their products out into the wider world.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. It's a toll road. So any goods coming into the site or being taken out have to pay tolls, and that would just add to their costs. And even 100 years earlier, we know from Angerstein that charcoal is coming in from many miles away, and a horse load of charcoal cost 4 shillings and sixpence, even then.
But I'm an entrepreneur of that period. I've got a good water source, I've got a huge mill pond, I've got all those buildings down there. Why don't I just increase my production, make more money, pay all the toll charges and still continue to make profit?
In order to increase production, you've got to change your power source. So they're using big steam engines down in Sheffield. Big steam engines powering a lot more powerful machinery, they can produce more. And you just haven't got the space down here for a big steam engine.
But in the woods, the experts are getting really animated about a process that potentially kick-started all metal production on this site. Ever since we first got here, our archaeologists have been puzzling over this great hunk of masonry in the middle of our mill pond. What is it? How old is it? None of them seem to know. But Francis has just summoned me here in his usual state of Francis high excitement. What is it?
Well, actually, Tony, this is quite urgent. That isn't just a heap of rubble. There's structure there, and that structure is potentially very exciting.
What do you reckon it is?
Well, Tony, we've got 3 stones over there which are part of a reused arch.
So what does that mean?
Well, an arch in a blast furnace is where they blew the air into it.
What sort of date?
About 1650.
How do we prove it, Jerry?
We've got 3 bits of evidence. The first is this large sheet of basically furnace lining where the slag inside the furnace has attacked the clay lining of the furnace. It is far too big for any other structure, I think, other than a blast furnace. The second piece of evidence is blast furnace slag. We've been turning up this green blast furnace, which is typical of charcoal blast furnace, in small amounts consistently from here. And thirdly, and most importantly, we've got metal. Now, if I can take a sample of this and prep it very quickly, then I might be able to actually resolve whether it is actually cast iron. And if it's cast iron, this is definitely a blast furnace.
So the urgency is that you want to get that under the microscope before we finish tonight?
Yeah.
Go on then. It's now a race against time to get this metal processed and say whether it's from a blast furnace or not. Luckily, the cavalry's arrived to help Jerry out.
Joking aside, this is hard work. It is. I mean, being realistic, Jerry, we got an hour. Are we going to get a result, do you think?
We'll get as far as we can. I mean, basically, what we'll do is, once we've got to this grit, we'll go and have a look at it under the microscope.
When we get it to the microscope, how do you distinguish between cast and wrought iron?
What we're hoping for is that we'll be in a sufficiently well-prepared state to see a certain microstructure. Now, what comes out of the charcoal blast furnace is a thing called grey cast iron, and that's got one characteristic feature, which are little flakes of graphite, and these should show at this level of preparation.
So it's fingers crossed, isn't it?
It's fingers crossed.
Yeah. Graphite flakes, graphite flakes, graphite flakes, graphite.
Francis has gone mad.
Flakes.
I don't even know what graphite flakes are. I just hope they find some. In Stuart's trench, he's found something that might just prove his crazy theory about a mill.
Ian was clearing down there. I was giving up on this, to be honest. But just last thing, we have a wall.
So that's the edge of a wall of a stone building or something?
Yep, the other facing edge is just coming underneath the section here. So it's a big old wall. That's a substantial stone wall, and it's different from all the other walls we've looked at as well, because it's not fine. It's not that sort of layered stone. I mean, these are boulders that they're using here.
To me, this all points that you've got this early mill here. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think Ian deserves a
pint.
A pint.
A pint.
Yeah. I'll let you buy me. I'm a Yorkshireman.
Fair enough, Stuart. I take my hat off to you. This discovery is evidence that Derwentcote evolved from a site using water power to grind corn to a site harnessing that water to produce metal. Question now is whether Jerry and Francis can prove whether we've found that first metal process.
Jerry, I can't wait, mate. Well, any graphite flakes? Graphite flakes, please.
Do you know what graphite flakes look like?
Show me.
No. Those are, I suspect, graphite flakes. I'm reasonably confident.
Great. So if you add that to the size and shape of the furnace lining and to that cast iron slag, then it really looks like we've got a blast furnace, doesn't it?
I would say for definite, quite honestly.
OK, well, that's fantastic.
It's superb.
I'm
it's been hard work.
I am so over the moon.
Good. Well, take the message.
What a result. We've proved that before the pond was here, it was home to a blast furnace. It pushes iron-making on this site back to the 1650s, almost a century earlier than previously thought. We've only got about half an hour left, Francis. What do you reckon we've learnt from the trenches we've put in?
I could tell you in 2 hours. I mean, we have learnt so much. We got how people lived, how they worked. No, it's all there. And, of course, it all fits together. That's the great fun of this. I mean, I know I'm sometimes rude about Stuart, but he helps cement landscapes together.
We came here looking for an iron and steel works, but what we've uncovered is a mini industrial revolution. Derwentcote might have been overtaken by big cities, but metals developed and perfected here changed the very world we live in today. Not bad for 3 days' work.
Who's going to be the bloke in the top hat? That's me.
All that remains is for us to record our own memory of the site.
Who's the lady in the crinoline?
Me! Oh, what?
Oh, pity you, Tony. That's his wife.
Time Team's version of the only photograph of what was once here.
All you need is your top hat, Tony, to finish it off. Smile. Gotcha. Recorded for history.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.